twice as much as we spent in 2002. On goods like jewelry, watches, books, luggage, telephones, related communication equipment, personal care products, same thing, doubled. Mark Cohen, the director of retail studies at Columbia University's Graduate School of Business, said this, and this is where they got the title of the article, said, all told, we are all accumulating mountains of things. He sometimes asks his students to count the number of things they have on them in class. And once they start counting up gadgets and cords and accessories, they end up near 50. And then Cohen said this, Americans have become a society of hoarders, which is why the number of self-storage units is rapidly increasing too. We now have about 52,000 such facilities nationally. That's double what we had 2 decades ago. So this whole notion of trying to do a journey with mountains of things is very relevant to where we are in our culture. Okay, I'm ready, Adam said. Adam, why are you bringing all of that? I've already planned for everything. Oh, but I need all this stuff. It won't be any trouble, honest. I know what I'm doing. Come on, let's go. Adam, you're heading the wrong way. Oh, me? So they started on their journey. Adam quickly realized this was not going to be as easy as he thought. Stopping at a stream, King Aaron said, crossing this stream is going to be tricky. Watch how I do it, Adam. Grabbing a hanging vine, King Aaron swung easily across the stream. But all Adam could see was the stuff he was carrying. Now it was Adam's turn. Carefully, he stretched his foot to the first rock. Okay, it's all right. You didn't know it was coming. It was a fast page turn, so I realized caught you off guard. So he stretched his foot to the first rock. All right, that's good. The rocks are very slippery. Zip, splash! Adam frantically grabbed for his things as they floated down the stream. But it was too late. He was only able to save his little red ball. Adam, try not to worry about losing your things. You really don't need them when you're with me, King Aaron said. What about my ball? Can I bring it? It's so small. And besides, it's the only thing I have left. It'll only cause you more trouble, Adam. Now, come on now. Stay close by my side, King Aaron said. Adam followed him, clutching his little red ball. And ahead of them lay the dangerous lost woods. Okay. That was pretty good. You guys get an award right there. Let's try it again. Ahead of them lay the dangerous lost woods. You guys are awesome. King Aaron had traveled this way many times before, and holding tight to the king's hand, Adam knew he would be safe. A howling sound swirled around them. It was the cold wind whistling through the twisted trees. The lost woods had many twisted paths that crisscrossed here and there, but King Aaron always knew which way to turn. Soon the woods began to brighten. Flowers bloomed everywhere. Adam was feeling safer. He let go of the king's hand and started to play with his little red ball. Oops, the ball rolled off the path and into the woods, down the hill and through a log. It rolled to a stop in a little clearing. Adam picked it up and turned to go back. But which way was back? Nothing looked familiar as he headed in what he thought was the right direction. This is the scariest page to me. That spider freaked me out every time, the size of it. The woods seemed darker and colder now. Frantically, Adam tried to find a way back. King Aaron, help! I'm lost! Exhausted, Adam fell to the ground. It's hopeless. I'll never find my way back, he said. And then Adam realized he wasn't alone. Low growling surrounded him. Wolves from behind behind every tree and rock crept a hungry wolf. Adam tried to scream for help. With one mighty roar, the wolves leaped at Adam. Adam waited, but nothing happened. He took a peek and could hardly believe what he saw. All around him, the wolves were cowering as though they were afraid. Adam didn't understand. And then he felt a big, strong paw resting on his shoulder. "King Aaron," Adam cried, "it was you who scared them away." "Adam," the king said, "aren't you leaving something behind? As in a little red ball?" "Nothing that I need as long as I'm with you," Adam replied. And they continued on their way. We all, at all times, have a little red ball that's got our attention. Might be quite a few of them. And often we rely on a little red ball instead of on Jesus. We think this will give us the security, the fulfillment, the satisfaction, the sense of significance. And we chase after it. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a Russian statesman, philosopher, brilliant man. He was in prison during the Soviet communist oppression. He was imprisoned in the Gulag, and he came to Christ there. Years later, he did some phenomenal writing, and one of the things that he said is, we always pay dearly for chasing after what is cheap. We always pay dearly for chasing after what is cheap. Why? Because when we chase after what is cheap, that means we're no longer chasing after something that's valuable. When we're clutching onto something that's cheap, we're not able to clutch onto something that's far more significant. And our things, we've been talking about our time and our abilities and our finances. In all three of those areas, we can clutch on to things that are not nearly significant enough, and they can distract us. But especially in the area of our money and our possessions, that little red ball can just draw us in and captivate us and clutch on to our hearts. And it's why Jesus spent so much time talking about money and possessions. Why? Because we always pay dearly for chasing after what is cheap. One in every 6 verses in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. If you haven't been with us, if you have, you heard this before. But if you haven't, one in every 6 verses in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus are dealing with money and possessions. 16 out of his 29 parables dealing with money and possessions. He talked more about money and possessions in heaven and hell combined. And there's a stereotype in churches that, if this is your first week and you're thinking, yep, so a stereotype, you go to church, they talk about money. We don't do that a whole lot. We actually do it more. The reason that we cower and back in a lot of churches is because the abuse that goes on in some circles, some televangelists, not all televangelists, but some that manipulate Scripture and do weird things, putting the guilt on people regarding giving so they can fund their own coffers in inappropriate ways. Just because of the abuse, though, does not mean we shouldn't talk about it, because Jesus spent so much time talking about it, and it's because of the liberation of it. If we can grasp the power of this little red ball and how it can do damage if we don't let it go and trust it. If we can realize that, Jesus says you can't serve both God and money. You're going to have to clutch onto one or the other. You can't serve both. So how do I keep this little red ball from gripping my life? How can I actually release my grip on it in a way that's free? There's one word. It's a great word for this week. Gratitude. When I begin to live with a posture of gratitude, I start realizing this comes from God and He's not stingy. And therefore, if I give this little red ball away, He'll provide another one. I don't have to worry. And it's this whole notion of seeing God's extravagant generosity towards us. That's what's behind Psalm 103, verse 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let all that I am praise the Lord. This is some of what we were doing during the doxology a minute ago. With my whole heart, I will praise his holy name. Let all that I am praise the Lord. May I never forget the good things he does for me. He forgives all my sins. He heals all my diseases. He redeems me from death. He crowns me with love and tender mercies. He fills my life with good things. My youth is renewed like the eagles. Now notice that. Those good things, this isn't necessarily bad until I start paying more attention to it than I should. How can the good things renew us instead of hold us back? How can these good things in our lives become tools that liberate us instead of prisons that enslave us? Has a lot to do with gratitude, which is why I call this message Galvanized by Gratitude. Now that word galvanize, if you're a steel person, you know there's various meanings. It's an offensive word and a defensive word. It's defensive in this sense. When steel is galvanized, it's protected. It's dipped in various things. Zinc is, I think, a primary coating. And it protects it from erosion. Galvanized also is offensive. When I'm galvanized by something, I'm propelled by it. So to be galvanized by gratitude is to be both protected and propelled. And for us embarking on this adventure called Northland's new chapter, we need to be protected and propelled, and gratitude will do it for us. Gratitude that's authentic, that's engaging with the majesty of who God is and what he's done for us through Christ. And it produces that posture that enables us to be his tools, because all of a sudden, instead of being fixated on the little red ball in each of our lives, we're fixated on some greater things. Now, in this series, we've looked at 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9. I'm going to go back to it one more time. Paul is writing to the church, the Corinthians, the church in Corinth, and he's writing to them about an offering he's taking for the church in Jerusalem, for the people of Jerusalem. They've had a crisis. It wasn't an earthquake or fires, but it produced the same kind of famine, same kind of difficulty, and they needed assistance. And so he's taking this offering. He's writing to the Corinthian church using the Macedonian church as an example. And this is a passage we looked at 2 weeks ago, and I want you to look at it again, but I want you to pay attention, and I've underlined some stuff. It has a lot to do with gratitude. Gratitude and our generosity, there's some things that go hand in hand. Here we go, verse 11, you will be enriched in every way, so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. This service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but is also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. There we go again. And verse 13, because of the service by which you prove yourselves, others will praise God. There we go. The gratitude starts getting contagious for the obedience that accompanies your confession of the gospel of Christ, and for your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you because of the surpassing grace God has given you. Thanks, here we go again, thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. So the notion of gratitude that comes up over and over in this text combines with two other things that we've been looking at. One is grace and the other is generosity. And we've talked about how grace and generosity interplay. Now I'm going to put a label over what we've been looking at and call it the cycle of gratitude. And so here we go, take a look at it, and it's what you've seen before without that heading, the cycle of gratitude. But gratitude is really the glue that holds us together. Bottom line, God's taking the initiative in this dance of redemption, of restoration, of bringing you and me back to life, restoring us to the original purpose we're made for. And that comes with so many blessings. And actually, even if you're not a follower of Christ, there's tons of blessings from what theologians will refer to as common grace, God being gracious to all living things in this lifetime. But in that grace, I need to start embracing and experiencing it through Christ. And as I experience extravagant grace, and the word extravagant, so I'm not trying to be flowery there. That's the word that's used. You see, the Greek word is perisseuo. We've looked at it a couple of times in this series. It's a word that Jesus uses in John 10:10. I've come that you might have life and have it perisseuo, abundantly. In Ephesians 1, we've got his lavished us with his grace. Perisseuo, with his grace, is the root word for that. It means overflowing, abundant, lavish, extravagant. So he has blessed us with extravagant grace, and when I start to experience that, that will lead me to practicing extravagant generosity. And actually, you can find out a lot. I can find out a lot about how deeply I'm experiencing God's extravagant grace by looking at my generosity. And that week, which is the first week of the series, we talked about how our generosity is like a thermometer. It gives us a reading of how we're doing in terms of our submission to him, our maturity, how loving we are, how grateful we are, etc. My generosity reveals so much about that. But there's a cycle here. Practicing that extravagant generosity leads to more deeply experiencing extravagant grace. So that's kind of the thermostat that we looked at in week number 2. A thermostat determines the temperature. So the more generous I am, the more that positively impacts my walk with God and my experience of this full life, this life with a capital L that Jesus tells us about. And here's what enables that dance to happen. It's gratitude. It's me having a grateful. And so us singing the doxology was very intentional to say that's something we should do every day. Now, what's it look like? In a practical way, I've had some great conversations with you guys during the week, stopping in stores, restaurants, and also in the foyer. And one thing that's been so encouraging is how you guys have said, let's roll up our sleeves. We realize, a lot of the teaching about stewardship has been abused by the church. That's no reason for us to be quiet. It's all the more reason for us to do it in a solid, biblical, grace-oriented way. So I'm grateful for your engagement with that. And as a result, we've extended the series for another 40 weeks. And so we're going to keep going. Just kidding. But I'm hoping over the next 40 weeks we'll be unpacking this. But some of you said, hey, let's get real practical. How do I start practicing that generosity with my time, my abilities, my finances? Let's go back through these two texts, 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, and look at 4 characteristics. And bottom line, you know how dropping the ball is a bad thing? Don't drop the ball. Here's one time I want to say it's a good thing. Drop the ball. Drop that little. How do I do that? Gratitude that fuels a generosity that's anchored around the grace of God. But what will it look like? Let me give you 4 characteristics. First, that generosity will be intentional. Intentional. I have to make a very specific, deliberate decision to let go, to be generous. Give it away. Go back to the text. You can see. Go ahead and bring it up because I've got my Bible and I'll turn to it, but good old technology is delayed. There we go. Each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give. Not reluctantly or under compulsion. For God loves a cheerful giver. So there's a notion of making a decision ahead of time. What a lot of us do, and when I was a young believer, I didn't think about generosity. I didn't think about it ahead of time. It was an afterthought. Somebody would come along and maybe they'd take an offering for something. I say, oh, okay, well, you just check, see if I had any change or some bills and put it in. I didn't start a day thinking, okay, today I want to give some of my time away for the benefit of somebody else. Every now and then I just do it. It's great to be responsive in those spur of the moments. And there's something really fun about that spur of the moment generosity with my time or maybe an expertise that I've got or my finances. But that should be the cherry on top. Usually those things are a little bit farther between if we're not being intentional from the get-go and beginning each day saying, how am I going to be generous today? With my time, with my abilities, with my finances. 1 Corinthians 16:2, on the first day of the week, each of you should set aside a sum of money. I tell you, our finances can be a great way to learn this, and it's a lesson that then spills over into our time and our abilities, but to do it ahead of time. Anybody here write out your to-do list at the end of the day, and each time you write it, you check them off?
What happened?
Yeah. Anybody here have friends who, at the end of the day, write their to-do list on that day and check it off? Where I've done that before. I didn't write the to-do list at the beginning of the day, but I just needed to write it at the end of the day, feel good about the day. And there's nothing deliberate about it. It was all reactive. Often that's how we approach our time and our abilities and our finances. Take our finances in particular. There are only a few options of where your finances are going to go. This is the priority order that most Americans deal with their finances and spend their money. First on basic expenses.
James.
Second on taxes,
Get out of there.
because you go to jail otherwise. Third starts getting tricky. We make lifestyle decisions for any number of reasons. And then fourth follows number three.
Nice.
Often debt comes because we want to adopt a lifestyle that's beyond our means, and so debt repayment becomes a part of that. Then if we've got anything left over, savings and investment, and the last thing is giving. Now what would happen, I was with some people on Thursday from our community that are involved in some amazing ministry and giving to some ministry stuff. One of them was saying they don't go to Northland, but heard about this series, said, you know what, that whole generosity thing, when we finally got it, it was a couple talking, not into a whole room, just in a small conversation. When we finally got it, it revolutionized our marriage, our walk with Christ, and basically moving giving up in that list to number one, and number two, or number three. It's like, hey, that's what God created us to do, and it has to do with being intentional and deliberate. I'm not going to be locking the doors, taking an offering here. This is for you and God to deal with. If we can help you with resources, we will. But it's how we're wired. Here's the second characteristic of dropping that ball, of being generous. It doesn't involve just being intentional, but being proportional. It's really important. A lot of people think there's a set amount or something. It's between you and God according to what the scriptures say, but it's a proportion. So there's a quality. Everybody does different things according to the amount of time, the amount of the abilities we have, the amount of finances. So verse 10 and 11, 12, 13 of 2 Corinthians 8. Here we go. And here's my judgment about what is best for you in this matter. Last year you were first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. I love that, by the way. It wasn't a compulsion thing. He said, now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has. Here we go. Not according to what one does not have. Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you're hard pressed, but that there might be equality. And that equality comes from, hey, everybody participating in a manner that's proportional to their means. I didn't read the entire verse 2 from 1 Corinthians 16 a minute ago, so here we go. 1 Corinthians 16, 2. On the first day of the week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money. That's the intentionality part, setting it aside. Nobody drifts into generosity. We make decisions to be generous or not, but here we go. In keeping with your income, saving it up. What's the proportion? Some people say it's 10%. Could be. New Testament talks about it basically, but assumes that. That's for your own scripture study. I'm not going to try to bind your conscience on that. It's just something, and it could be that it's incremental and moving in that direction. But bottom line, it's not just a set amount. It's looking at overall how has God blessed me and understanding where that's coming from and realizing that it's all His to begin with. Chronicles. 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 11. A lot of people say, well, how much is God's? Is it 10%? Well, this answers it. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. So how much of what I have is God's? The answer is all of it. But he's entrusting it to me as a steward. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You're exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You're the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. Now, our God, we give you thanks and praise your glorious name. So there is an aspect of deep gratitude and understanding. Basically, it's all his. And so he, at various seasons, will lead me to various proportions. And for some people, they will say 10%. Arlene and I abide by that as a minimum. You might be led in another way. That's between you and God. But a lot of times it's approaching it from that standpoint and understanding it's all his. Peter Marshall was the chaplain of the Senate, middle part of the last century, and a wealthy business guy came up to him, pretty influential guy, and said, I got a problem. He was a follower of Christ. He said, well, tell me about your problem. He said, well, it's about tithing. The whole 10% thing. When I was just starting my business, as a young man, I was making $20,000 a year. $2,000 a year was not, it wasn't a big issue. I was able to do that. But now my company is growing. I make about $500,000 a year. And I cannot afford to give $50,000 of that away to various ministries and causes. And he was pretty stressed about it. And so he said, do you have any advice? And Peter said, could I pray for you? The guy said, sure. And so Peter Marshall prayed, said, God, thank you for the way that you have blessed my brother. And I realize he has a serious problem that he is now trying to deal with. And I pray that you will reduce his salary back to the point where he can afford to give 10% again. Amen. I looked at him and the point was made. How much of it is God? But that proportional is very difficult without it being intentional and thinking through it. But it's proportional. It takes pressure off. Man, Mark chapter 12, verse 41. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings are put. I told you about this verse before. And watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts. So Jesus is sitting next to the credit kiosks or the cash boxes, watching what people do. But a poor widow came and put in 2 very small coffers worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. Why? Because generosity is proportional. It's not a particular amount. They all gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty. She put in everything. All she had to live on. How do I figure out that proportion? Well, it's between God and you. There's another principle that informs that. It's the third characteristic of letting go of the little red ball. This generosity that's grace motivated and gratitude fueled. My generosity is to not just be intentional, proportional, but sacrificial. In this sense, so often we think our generosity is surplus, that we give away the red ball that we no longer need. It's just there. What if I were to give a red ball away that was pretty significant and important? Go back to the text, chapter 8, verse 1, 2 Corinthians. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches in the midst of a very severe trial. Notice that they were not in a good spot to be generous. Arlene and I, one time, were dealing with a really significant financial crisis. We had to make a decision. Do we continue to be generous or not? And we made the decision to do so. And I believe that had a direct result in God rescuing us, in a sense. Their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability. So it was not surplus. It was something that was inconvenient. To what degree? That's between you and the Father. To say, okay, how inconvenient? 2 Samuel 24:24, David says, I will not sacrifice to the Lord God burnt offerings that cost me nothing. So in other words, it's not just surplus, it's me making a decision to say, I don't just get the red ball that's back in my closet that I no longer use. That's like a given. Those things, get rid of those. But it's maybe the red ball that I'm using on a daily basis that is important. Do I trust God? And do I understand that, as Jesus said, it really is better to give than receive. A couple of years ago, the Boys and Girls Clubs in Atlanta did something with a number of their kids that come from less fortunate environments. They gave them, found out about their shopping list, their Christmas list, what they wanted and what their parents wanted. They gave them both gifts and gave them a pretty difficult decision. Or was it difficult? They was.
This year's Christmas, what are you hoping to get?
A computer, big giant Barbie house.
A trophy case.
The Xbox 360, Minecraft Legos.
What do you think your mom or dad wants for Christmas?